Well, having started this little job, which was going to be really simple, all I needed to do was to shape the steel tyre that's on the cast iron wheel. I suddenly found where I actually was, and the wheels were done 12 years ago, maybe a bit more, and put together for a move, and then I moved again, and then I moved again. So, and this locomotive I started, well, I commissioned the boiler in 1998 and it's now 2025. So this has been ongoing for some time. One of the things I have done in the meantime is not only upgraded the machine tools, I've also managed to upgrade my measuring capabilities, and via eBay and other things I've managed to get larger and more accurate measuring tools. And one of the things I've just done, having taken the wheel off the axle, is started measuring the lengths of the axle compared to the drawings. This one, for instance, I found is 12.5 thou too long. Other ones are slightly longer. So I've got a little bit of machining to do here. So I've got this axle in. I don't know whether you can really see that it's slightly discoloured at the end there with a bit of rust. So that needs to be cleaned up mechanically before I chemically clean it to bond it. But what I'm going to do, I've also noticed that the centre hole is a little bit damaged. It's not bad, but it's a little bit damaged. So while I have the opportunity and the axle is out, I'm going to face this back by 6 thou or 6.5 thou, and then flip it over and do the same the other end, so that my bearing surface remains effectively the same length on both ends. So I've set it up with a gauge which is now sitting, not moving. So I'm quite pleased with that. So that's now set. And this is a 1/2 thou or 0.001, a 0.001 millimetre scale. But I say no movement on it at all. So I have put this in the forejaw. I've got some aluminium strips that I've cut under the jaw faces to keep the bearing surface undamaged. Now I've got the digital readout, I can actually move in the amount I want to take the amount I want off of there. So I've got much more ability now to cut accurately to length than I had before. So I'll get a tool in there and I'll cut that. I'm also going to drill through the axles, simply because it always seems to me to be a good move with something that doesn't need to be solid to make it not solid. And all the originals were bored through anyway. The centre certainly is already, so I'm going to do the same with this. I'm only going to take it out to 1/8 inch, 3mm. I've got a long series 3mm drill, so I'll drill this through to the middle, and then I'll do the same coming in from the other side. I'm going to re-centre both ends so that I know when I set it up that the centre on this end is absolutely central to this part of the work, and do the same at the other end. And then I'll get the wheels back on. So that's where we are at the moment. Yeah, not quite where I want it to be, but Okay, that's sitting on there, and that is showing that I am very, very slightly high. So you've got the bubble on here. Right, that is minuscule low, so that's fine. It's very, very slightly under centre height. Which is better than being over. And that can go back in its home. That's just touching there. So let's go to there and go to 0. And probably up to about there. Yeah, sorry about that. That was a discussion with the other half, who's currently at B&Q buying paint for the outside of my shed. Yeah, I'll get a picture of the outside of the shed at some point. Yeah, you don't... Well, you probably do want to know, but I don't really want to tell you, but yeah. Okay, let's get back to this. Let's put that through a little bit deeper. I have got to make a tool rack to go along the back here. This is slowly driving me nuts. So that's a 3mm drill going through there. think it's an extra long series. That's on ½ inch at the moment, so I'm just going to let's speed that up a bit. It's a bit too slow. I've got to what, 1300 RPM. I'm just going to double check my dimensions. 5.8 inches, so if I go in, that's on 2.5, so if I go in just over 3, then it will be approximately the same from the other end. About another ¼ inch. I can actually feel through my fingertips on the back of the drill here, of the tailstock here, when I'm cutting, and I can feel when the drill is starting to bounce a little. Okay, so that's through there just over 2.5 inches. So I've got about just under 3 inches to go through from the other side, thereabouts. So what I've got here is a wire brush. Taken most of that off there. That's given me a mechanically clean finish. So what I'll do now is repeat the other end. I'll double check the measurements. I'll actually just run a file over that edge there. Let's take that down a bit. So I've got an edge there to pick up. Well, we're back. I've just turned down this side by 1/6 thou, and I'm just going through now with the drill. Feel that now touching at the end there, and it's cutting. You feel it through the back of the wheel here. Gone straight through. Now, excellent. Well, I'm quite pleased with that because that's fed straight into the previous hole from the other side. So, that's actually gone through in a straight line and met up in the middle. Brilliant. Okay, so that's that one done. Next up is going to be getting it fitted back to the wheels. Fingers crossed. Well, this isn't really where I wanted to be. I've had a much closer look at the keyways, and I'm not happy with what I see. They're not as accurately cut as I would like, so I would not like to guarantee they'll actually do the job of keeping everything in line. So that means I've got to start making some bolts, axles from a bolt. Let's get it the right way around, John. Okay, I'm using my favourite source of materials, which is a free one. And what I've got in there is, I think, a 26mm 10-9, so high tensile steel bolt. I'm also thinking of changing the way I'm putting bearings in, which means I'm probably going to make new axle boxes as well. And I've just ordered some needle roller bearings. So yeah, so I'll need to make these a slightly different size to the other ones. The outside edges where they go into the bore of the wheels I will keep as they are, so I'll repeat those dimensions on this. I've also just found out that this chuck is not running quite true, so I'm going to need to have a look at that. But all I'm doing at the moment, I'm going to take this end down so it's circular, then I'll put a centre in it, and then I can play with the settings. Once I've got this turned down, I'll stick it in the 4-jaw and get it running accurately, and then start to look at turning new axles. The centre axle I'm going to leave because I don't really want to completely remake the fact it takes a crankshaft, so it's got a crank axle, and that was a nightmare. So I'm going to leave that. I'll do a little bit of adjustment, and that should enable me to go through that one. So although having thinking about it, I'll probably end up needing to do the whole damn thing again. Right. Well, what I'm going to do now, having got a reference end on there, I'm going to stick it in the forge jaw and I'll start turning it down much closer to the size of the shaft. So I've done a setup on the forge jaw. It's about a thou out, but I'm not too worried about that. So what I'm going to do is turn this down until I start cutting into the shank. I want enough there to grab in the jaws a bit later. And the key is to have something to grab hold of that's round. So I'm going to take that down and then I'll centre this end and then flip it around, do the same at the other end, and then set it up so that I can turn the length. Right, let's get rid of this. Let's just take that down. I think it's 1,000. Right, well that'll do for the moment, and I'll come back a bit later and try and get this sort of where I want it to be. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll turn that round, I'll grip it by half of that, get it centred, and then I'll centre the end, and then I can turn the length of it down. So yeah, let's do that before I do anything else. Okay, so that is nice and set up, no variation at all. So the next thing is going to be to spin it up a little bit. Let's slow it down quite a lot. I just want to see if it waves around. Well, I've come up with an idea. I'm not saying it's a good idea, I'm just saying it's an idea. I'm making some new axles from these bits of old 26mm bolt. And as you can see, I've got enough material on there to do that without an issue. Now, my axle boxes that I made earlier are split bearing. So the axle box splits and I've got 2 half shells in there. Now that's quite good, but I must admit I'm not 100% happy with bronze bearings. They'll do, but there's a better way. And I thought, while I've got this apart, I'll have a look at improving it. So I've ordered some needle roller bearings. And the external diameter is enough that I can remachine or manufacture new axle boxes. Again, split them so that I can put them around the bearing once the bearing is in situ on the axle. Being high tensile bolts, this material is quite hard, and I think for the sort of service life this is going to have, running the inner race of the needle rollers on here shouldn't be an issue. It's low speed anyway, but it should reduce the friction. Now these aren't an issue because I can just machine the bearing surfaces for the rollers to the dimension I need, which is 3/4 of an inch. However, on these it is, because that bearing is not 3/4 of an inch, it's very slightly under, I think, and it's also not hardened or not hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these off of here. I have another piece of steel sitting in there, and I'm going to machine up a pair of sleeves that will be a shrink fit over the bearing surface, and if I can shrink them on and then machine them back to the dimension I need for the bearings, then I can put the needle rollers on the centre driver as well. So that's where I'm sort of heading at the moment. I've got a piece of steel sitting in there, and all I really need to do with that is bore it out to a thou or a couple of thou under the diameter there, then warm it up, slide it on, let it shrink in place, and then machine it in situ on the axle. Well, that's the theory anyway. So we'll see how that goes. Well, we're looking at boring these sleeves. I'm going to allow 2 thou interference fit, so I need one at 0.7650 plus or minus half a thou, one at 7685 down to 7680. Please don't shout at me over what I've done here. I suddenly found that I didn't have an appropriate size boring tool that will fit this lathe. But I've got boring tools for the mill. So what I've done is I've used the Morse taper sleeve for the lathe, and stuck it in an ER32, ER16 collet chuck, which is now holding my boring tool. I'm going to run this at about 10,000? No, 1,000 RPM. And I'm giving it about a 2.5 thou per revolution feed. A little bit of coolant, and I'm currently sitting on 6.85. Oh, sorry, 0.685. So let's select that. 0.685. So 0.6855, 56 it says on there. Okay, I can live with a 10,000th out. I'm going in here about just under an inch. So this one I want to be at 0.763 is my ideal, 0.765. Right, I'm on 0.754 here. I need to take it up to 0.765. So I'll take 10 thou out. So I'm going to seven six. Right, 0.760 according to this. Point 75, 750, 760, 763, 5. Oh, you imbecile. Oh, that was stupid, wasn't it? 0.764. Which is 1.5 down to that, so I can take that. Oh, that was nearly very, very stupid. I took the dimension of the axle, and instead of taking away to go undersize on it for a shrink fit, I've gone over to give clearance. Thankfully, the size I've just taken this out to, which is size for size at the moment on the axle, on one of the bearings, or one of the journals rather, is actually spot on where I need it to be for the slightly larger one. So that's good, accidentally. So what I now need to do is part that off 3/4 of an inch long, and then I can do the next one. Oh. Right, well that's sleeve 2. So just caught it on a bolt stuck on the end there. So that's the sleeves done. Now I've got to start to work out how I'm going to actually fit the blasted things. I've just taken that end down to 0.625 or 5/8. That is down to 0.759. Actually 0.7592, which is exactly the same dimension as the original axle where it goes into the wheel. This piece here I'm now going to take down to 13/16. And 13/16 is the internal diameter of the bearings I bought. So I'm going to turn it down to very, very slightly over that, about half a thou to a thou over, and I'll just take that down, and then I'll go over it with some emery cloth just to give a really nice surface finish. And then from there on, the reason for this step down at 5/8 is I'm going to hold that end in a chuck, so on the dividing head, so that will be held in the dividing head, and then I can mill the keyway in there and the same at the other end in one setting. So I'll set up, mill one end, turn it round the relevant number of degrees, and then mill the other end, so I don't have to change the setup at all and then start guessing where the other keyway is going to be. But I do need to work out what size key I need, because I'm going to need to make the keyways in the wheels slightly bigger to square them up a bit. I'll work that out as I go along, or before I go along, to be honest. Right, I'll crack on in a minute, and I'm going to go and double check my dimension. So that needs to come down to 0.8125. It's currently 0.85. So let's do a quick check on that. Now under. 835, 836, 8372. 0.8372. According to this, it's 8.8125. So that is dead on. Be interested to see if one actually slips over there. Of course, this is going to be quite. That's not too bad. Right, I've gone and grabbed one of the bearings, and let's just see how this goes. Oh, you beauty. That just fits nicely. And if I can get this at the bottom, which is where the oil well is in the axle box, that will clamp in nice and tight there. A little bit of movement, which is what I want, and that will then spin quite nicely. Excellent. Pleased with that. So I'll leave you there, simply because I won't have time to do much more in here, and I'd like to get this out by the end of this week for a change. So I'll leave that there. I hope you've enjoyed this relatively short visit to Dad's shed, and seeing the process I'm going through to decide how to try and do this properly in the future. So that's gone from that, which in itself has gone from that, which as you saw came out of a 26mm high tensile steel bolt. So I hope you've enjoyed your visit, and I look forward to seeing you in your next trip to Dad's shed. Bye for now.